Now, thousands of secondary school children will be tested for coronavirus in schools across London, Kent and Essex in a bid to stem rising infection rates. The country's chief medical officer said increasing rates of infection in the southeast were concerning and has encouraged people to stick to the guidance. Well, joining me now is Courtney, the Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union. Very good afternoon to you. Your assessment then of this experiment that's being launched?
Well, we think it's long overdue, so we're pleased that mass testing is being rolled out, but we've been calling for it for a while. And certainly our members in Hull, in the northeast, are now saying to us, how come this happens when it's schools in the southeast? How come we were ignored when cases were so high in our areas? The government was trialling it in Liverpool. We think it is worthwhile. We think it's an important step forward. But what we're predicting is this, that in the areas where they're doing it, cases are very high. They're going to do this testing next week and they will end up sending lots of children home. And we're going to have a chaotic end to term where children are sent home en masse. And it would have been much better for the government to have been supporting moves in schools to move to online learning for this last week of term. In fact, they've set their face completely against that. And where schools were planning it, the government stepped in and instructed them not to. I think they'll regret that in the coming weeks.
Even this close to the end of term, I mean, effectively, some private schools, for example, will be closing in the next few days, but many state schools have only got a matter of days left till the end of term. Will it be such a disaster to move to online learning in this way if they have to as a result of the tests?
We don't think it will be a disaster at all, but it'll be chaotic. It'll happen in a chaotic way. Schools won't have been preparing for online learning. They'll be forced into it at the last minute. We've just had the new set of figures from the Office of National Statistics from their coronavirus survey. And I think these figures must be very worrying for the government because they show that school-age pupils, the cases are continuing to rise. They dropped over half term when schools were closed. They dropped a little during the lockdown. Schools weren't closed, but the effect got them to come down a little. They're going up again now. And now secondary pupils aged from year 7 to year 11 are the highest rate of any of the demographic groups. They've got the higher coronavirus rate than the university students age group, where we're also worried about them coming home. And it's important to know that children can transmit to their families. So there would have been a better end to term if the government had been planning in advance instead of setting their face against all schools that were wanting to plan in advance. I mean, there are only now 3 age groups where cases are rising on this ONS survey. Secondary pupils going up really sharply again, primary pupils and 39 to 45-year-olds. That's the age group with most parents of school-age children. Those facts are linked together. Children can transmit in family situations to their families, and that has to be a worry for government. I think even now, government should be speaking out more. We need this mass testing to be rolled out in many more areas. Actually, there are other areas in the country that have higher rates of the virus than some of the places where the mass testing is being rolled out. So it should be happening much more widely, but the government it's got to stop ignoring what sensible people say to it. We called for schools to be in the circuit break. That would suppress the cases much more. We've called for sensible arrangements around secondary school rotas, but the government just keeps turning its face against all of these sensible steps. And now we're in this sort of a bit of a panicky situation in these local authorities where we're going to have to do this mass testing next week and then children sent home en masse is what I predict.
But Courtney, isn't it the case that the government have just tried extremely hard to avoid closing those school gates and putting all pupils in a blanket online learning situation where they can? You describe it as being chaotic because it's being done in these hotspot areas where the testing potentially could come back with a high rate of positivity. But schools should have been preparing for this, especially if they are in these areas with increasing cases. Those provisions are the responsibility of the school to get on top of, surely.
The government is doing nothing to support schools in preparing for these things. That's the truth of it. The government keeps saying they want schools open at all costs, but actually the way they're behaving is schools opening at no cost. So schools have not been supported in the extra costs that they've taken on. They've not been supported in delivering the laptops for the children who need them. 700,000 children still don't have either a laptop or broadband at home, and schools have not been supported in preparing for online learning. And where schools have been talking about a system for a rota, where children are taught every lesson, where teachers are in school every day teaching every lesson, but where children are home for some of them, the government has absolutely told them they are not allowed to do that, no matter what the local circumstances. So I'm afraid that government is just ignoring sensible advice and just ploughing ahead by trying to make out that everything's normal. And this is not going to be a normal year. And the government needs to. You see parents on Twitter, on Facebook, saying their child has just been sent home for their second 10-day sending home because of public health advice. Parents don't know that's happening. There's no plan around it. It comes up randomly because of where the virus is. It's not preparing for a system which keeps cases lower and means that we're not in that situation. And sometimes these are children in year 11 or year 13 who are preparing for their GCSEs or the A-levels. And we don't think this is the right way. And it's not just my union that's been saying this. The Secondary Heads Union, ASCL, has been saying that schools should be allowed to contemplate blended learning, they're calling it, similar to our rota suggestion. But they're saying that, head teachers should be able to move in that direction. Just this morning, the NAHT, which is more the Primary Heads Union, they said that they thought that schools, especially in these areas where the mass testing is rolling out, should now be able to go online learning. Just go into that now, because that will be easier to plan. But the government just sets its face against all of this sort of advice, I'm afraid.
All right, Kevin, Courtney, we take your point. Thank you very much from the National Education.